Okay. Welcome to Letters to the People podcast. Today we have our guest, Chris Anatra, and we were introduced by a common friend actually a little bit ago. So it's been, I guess, last year, 2020, and we did a little bit of back and forth, kind of connected and had a good time with what that was looking like. And then we were able to have a conversation, and through that conversation, I invited you to be a part of the podcast. And I'm really glad that you're here today. So thank you for being here.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's very entertaining to talk to you. So I'm excited about our conversation today. So what I would love for you to do, the reason I invited you on was we have had a really great conversation about cults, the well-known established system that we've both belonged to, the religious system, and the group that you were a part of, we can actually see as a cult. And the group I was a part of, I claim that as a cult too. They both have very specific cult characteristics. And so I would love to know if I want to have a conversation with you about where it began for you, what the exit looked like, where you've evolved to. And so if you just want to start by kind of telling us a little bit about you, or a lot about you actually, but just start with letting us know who you are and what you'd like to share, and we can start from there.
Okay. Well, in my personal situation, I began my life being born into what I would consider a cult and what other people would consider a cult as well. It is the group known as Jehovah's Witnesses. Mm-hmm. And so from the time I was young, that was pretty much the only thing that I knew of. And, it's a very interesting life to have. People that are in that lifestyle, they kind of will resonate with a lot of what I have to say, because a lot of it will be very familiar to them, but it's a very controlled way of life. Very interesting way to grow up as a teenager as well. And what happened for myself personally is when I got into my 20s, I was doing things such as giving what they call public talks. I would travel around. I'm from Connecticut, so I travel around Connecticut and give like 45-minute talks about different subjects to different congregations. And then something started happening to me where I began to have doubts about what the teachings were. I began to uncover evidence that just things didn't add up. And that started me on a process where I began to question things. And that led to my eventual being what they call disfellowshipped or excommunicated. And that happened when I was in my mid-30s. So I spent a good chunk of my life being very, very dedicated to that particular group. And then towards the end, when I had questions, is when things started to fall apart.
So tell me a little bit about what was so appealing to you when you were, in the early years. What made it so you didn't really look at where you were living and how you were living as odd?
Yeah, so what happens when you're in a group like that, you are taught, well, they call it the truth. Mm-hmm. So you're taught that you are in a very special religion, and actually the only group that God approves of. So you're made to feel in a certain way special that way, where the rest of the world is just living in whatever. They might think they're on the right path, but Jehovah's Witnesses know better. They know that they're not going to survive. Mm-hmm. So it puts you into a certain mindset where you don't associate with like growing up as a teenager. You can only associate with like other Jehovah's Witness children or other Jehovah's Witness teenagers. So it puts you into a unique position. And then because access to other information is restricted, you're only dealing with what they're presenting to you. And you don't have a chance to like open your minds, expand your horizons, and see what else is out there. Mm-hmm. Because if somebody says X, but somebody else says Y, why aren't you even allowed to hear what the Y argument is? You're only allowed to hear the X argument, or else you just get shut down right away.
Right.
So yeah, so that kind of like is the appeal to it. Like, oh, I'm going to be part of the group that's going to be the only survivors of like a world cataclysm that they call Armageddon. So it makes you feel really special and really sad for the rest of humanity. So that was kind of the mindset that I had growing up.
It's a similar mindset. I would say that I share a very similar mindset with you. I grew up in the Mormon Church and the LDS religion, and it was surprising to me as we were having our initial talk, and then even what you just said here. So many parallels. The information that is offered, that is distributed, that I grew up with, definitely was the truth. It was actually a higher truth. It was a more accurate truth because it was more timely. It had been revealed present day, 1800s, that kind of thing. And so to grow up and to know that we were the chosen people, we were the promised ones, we were here to help save the world if people chose into that. And then it gets more complex. But, I also remember there was a time in my early teenage years that my dad, I think this is when the God Makers came out, actually. And I don't have the year right, but it was a movie made specifically about the Mormon Church and their ideas about the heaven and how you progress and become a god. And around that time, I remember out of the blue, it seemed like out of the blue, because I certainly wasn't looking for literature that was contrary or different than what the church had approved. But my dad was, he was very much about, you don't want to look at anti-Mormon literature, you don't want to read outside of this. And then the church itself is structured that way. What they offer as truth, what they offer as doctrine, what they offer as resources, what they offer as their education system, it is to stay within that confinement as the source of the official narrative, the official truth. I mean, the Mormon Church is full of apologists too. Like, there's this whole, people have questions, and then there's just this whole reasoning behind, well, here's this and this is that. And even the idea that if you question it, the problem is you, because the ultimate truth is, falls within, in the Mormon religion, it's the prophet and the counselors and the guys that are actually leading the church. I think you were saying something about kind of the group mentality within the Jehovah Witness group. So tell me where kind of the rubber meets the road with where doctrine finds its teeth with Jehovah Witnesses.
Yeah, so with Jehovah's Witnesses, they have their own version of the Bible. It's called the New World Translation. Mm-hmm. So they've interpreted the Bible a certain way. There's definitely a lot of key words that they've replaced. That's not in things like the King James or any other Bible translations. So they have that going as well. And they're pretty much, they're teaching, and I can remember this from when I was a kid. Like, one of my first memories, I was probably like 3 or 4 years old, and someone picking me up to like ring the doorbell and be able to like offer the Watchtower and Awake magazine. That's pretty much how things started off for me. And that whole concept about my little presentation would be, excuse me, sir or lady, would you like to live forever in paradise on earth? And who would say, and you could play with animals and stuff like that. Who's going to say no to like a 4-year-old kid who's saying that to them? Right. But it's a reflection of what their teaching is, that basically that there is going to be a world cataclysm that they call Armageddon, and that Jesus is going to come down with the angels and basically kill everyone that's not a Jehovah's Witness. And the birds would feast upon their flesh, and it gets really dark and scary.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's basically like what their teaching is. And if you can accept their teaching and you become baptized into their faith, then you can live forever. And so you'll get out of that trap that all these other people are going to be dying, be killed.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. I could see how the dark side of that would definitely be, it wouldn't be very appealing. What is the message that's going to keep me from being there? And it's interesting too, the parallels between our original religions, our religious systems, with missionaries that go knocking on the doors, the young men that come out of, and young women. And it's both young men and young women.
It's for 2 years, right? In the Mormon Church.
It is for 2 years. They did have at let's see, how have they changed that? There was a period of time, it was 2 years, and then they changed it to 18 months, and then they went back to 2 years. And I think that's pretty much where it's staying right now. The things with COVID, I actually had a son that was out on a mission that was brought home in January because of the whole thing. Was it January? I'm sorry, I misspoke that one. He came home after all of the shutdowns were happening. I'll have to remember the date on that. But he came home in 2020, and he wasn't scheduled to come home until December of 2020. And so he came home early. I remember it was like, yeah, I want to say early in that process. But yeah, it is a 2 year. It's a 2 year commitment. And
See,
go ahead.
I was going to interject with Jehovah's Witnesses. It's a lifetime. Like, if it was just 2 years to get out, that's one. But it's like a lifetime of like knocking on doors and approaching people and doing Bible studies. Yeah.
Right. So with that lifetime, that's where you were able to, as a 4-year-old, step into that role and knock on a door, ring a doorbell, and work with that pamphlet. So the questions that started coming around for you, did they have anything to do with you thinking or realizing you were involved in a cult mentality, or were they just other questions?
Yeah, it was actually a combination of both, because the other questions I had about things about how they interpreted different prophecies, like I just was not like, it wasn't resonating with me anymore. Like I felt like there was something wrong. Like I wasn't accepting like whatever they were saying for dates, or a lot of times they use the year 1914. But all these things weren't resonating with me. And then I began to uncover other evidence of hidden satanic and occult symbols in their literature. And that really blew my mind, because I'm like, that can't be. There's no way that there's like pentagrams and blah, blah, blah. And I came across this book that documented all of that. And it showed the different pictures, and then it showed where there are different symbologies and so forth. And I'm like, wow, this is like, why would they allow this? Like, why would satanic symbols be allowed in their literature? So that made me even more like, what is going on with this religion? Like, really, what is going on? And also, too, a lot of times the people within the religion are like, they definitely will report you. Like, it's a very gossipy type environment. And, oh, brother X, Y, and Z said this about that. We need to report him to the elders, blah, blah, blah. So those type of things happen literally all the time. And that's how I was actually. My situation was, I had shared some of the things I learned with someone, and then I was reported. And then I got the dreaded phone call that all Jehovah's Witnesses dread, where I pick up the phone and it's like, I'm like, hello. And it's like, this is brother so-and-so. You've been invited to attend a judicial committee meeting. And I'm like, oh God, here we go. It's on this date at this time. You can come if you like. You don't need to come, but we're going to be talking about you. So I made it a fact to make sure I went there, and that was quite the meeting as well. But that set off a whole chain of events that led to my excommunication and so forth, which turned out to be the best thing of my life. Like, it was just like, at first it seems like, oh my God, what are they going to do? I've devoted my whole life to them, and now I'm saying this, and they want to brand me put me in a corner as what they call an apostate. But after it all happened, the sense of freedom and like joy for standing up for yourself, like seriously standing up for yourself and knowing that you are correct in doing it, made the whole process. I'm glad I went through it. Lost all my friends, because when you're in that religion, you grow up with people and teenagers, you do stuff together. Yeah. Lost all of them. My family that was still involved, they wouldn't talk to me. And people were even told that if someone was seen talking to me, that they in turn would be excommunicated or disfellowshipped just from talking to me.
Terrifying.
So, yeah, it's just like, it's control. It's like the control is so extreme. It's off the charts, literally off the charts.
Did you have any experiences where maybe after you were excommunicated, that somebody came back to you and said, somebody else got in trouble for talking to you, or did you have any of that blowback that you're talking about?
Yeah, I had weird things happen to me. Like, I was probably like 2 or 3 weeks after this had happened, I went grocery shopping, and I'm in the grocery store with my cart going down the aisle, and somebody that was in the congregation that I was in saw me, realized who it was, like spun her cart around and literally sprinted away from me. I'm like, okay.
Oh,
I'm like,
dear.
really?
Wow.
So yeah, so I had a lot of those types of experiences, and I would try to reach out to friends to try to like tell them my side of the story. No one would return my calls. No one would talk to me. I basically like lost them all. So
So that's a fairly, I mean, when you say that, that feels really complete, and it would be a lot of motivation for people to not want to really face what you're facing or what you faced at that time. So when you said they won't talk to you, they knew they had something that was pretty dire standing in front of them, and they also knew that there was a good chance that would happen because the community policing, I guess, is a good way to put it.
yes,
You guys watching each other and taking
yes,
that responsibility in hand on your own. I can relate to that one too. I know that the Mormon Church is actually structured in a way that that kind of information does get passed along, and it's formally, talked about and accepted. There's a whole system in play. I think it's undergone a little bit of a revamping since I was a member of the church, but the way it used to be, they had just the patriarchy was very, very well designed, and so there were monthly what they would call home teachers, and so this would be a pair of men, that would come visit the family, and that they would
yeah,
deliver a lesson, but they were there also to like glean information. Do you have something like that?
yeah. And Jehovah's Witnesses, they call those shepherding calls, where they usually have
Mm,
like two men that come over to your house and talk to
mhm.
you and your family and so forth to see where you're at. How come you're
Yeah.
not, increase your hours to spend more time knocking on doors? You only spent 2 hours, you only spent 2 hours knocking on doors last month. Can't you do any better than that? Or whatever the case was. Yeah.
How would they know that? How many hours? Did you guys have to actually keep track of that? Keep record and
Yeah.
report?
Absolutely. There's a whole like record keeping thing that has to be kept track of, so that you track all the time you spend talking to people. If you study the Bible with anyone, how much time you
Wow.
spend talking to your own kids, and you have to hand in a monthly report to show that. So they look at the monthly reports, and they could say like, hey, you've been averaging 12 hours a month, and now you're down to 2. Like what's going on? What's happened? So
So
total monitor.
they relied on members to be honest, kind of. Is that because God's watching over your shoulder,
Oh,
or I mean, tell me about that.
yeah. I think a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses do try to be as honest as like above average honest, in a lot of different degrees. So it was definitely the honor system. Yeah, you
Oh
could have
wow.
easily inflated the numbers, and then they would be, oh, he's okay. But yeah,
Right. I think that's really similar to the tithing interview that Mormons have on a yearly
right.
basis. You go in, you talk to the bishop, and they ask if you're a full tithe payer, which is conditional. You want to be a full tithe payer if you want to go to the temple. I mean, that is a requirement. Didn't always used to be that way, but that came in. And man, there's a lot of money that gets poured into that church just from
See,
that one thing. But that was also honor code.
I was going to say, I think like when it comes to the money situation, I think the Mormons were smarter, because like if you're Jehovah's Witness, you're encouraged to be like a landscaper or a janitor,
Hmm.
like usually like not to say landscapers are lower income, but usually not like professional, not like lawyers or doctors. So I think with Mormons, there's a lot more professional people there that maybe are earning more money, so they can tithe a little bit more.
They're very dedicated to those tithes. At one point, the church I know has its own real estate department. They've got so many departments, but they have their own real estate department because so many contractors, developers, people that are landowners have and do dedicate, or what's the word? They will donate sections or parcels of land to
Wow.
the church for their tithe, for the tenth of it. So, and I know this specifically because at one of the houses that I built, the property that we purchased was the tithing property. So when I went to purchase it, I had to go through the church's realtor, not just a regular realtor, because it was going to be sold to us from the church, but it was donated to them by the community developer as his tithing. And so, I mean, the resources that the church has is pretty vast. And so, yeah, and they have their own university. I mean, Brigham Young University is a private university, and it's, you know, run by the church. The colleges or the university itself is higher education, and they do talk about that. I think there's in fact, I know that there's a quote, "The glory of God is intelligence," and that's one of the things they're leaning towards is, you know, the intellect. And we could go on and on about that, but there is, yeah. So quickly, I didn't actually know this. Why would Jehovah Witness members be encouraged to do more like jobs that you were describing versus a more, I don't know,
Well,
higher wage warning, I guess? I don't know what
yeah.
that was.
No, number one is that they encourage you not to go to college, like not to have additional schooling. And that was one of the challenges I faced. Like after graduating high school, I really wanted to get more into computer science because I loved programming. Even as a teenager, I was programming all the time. Got my first copyright on a program when I was 14. And I wanted to like further that. And I started I was kind of in defiance of them a little bit. So I did go to college for 1 year, but I was constantly in meetings like, why are you doing this? Like this world has no future, blah, blah, blah. You need to, you know, do something less, but spend more time knocking on doors, kind of a thing. So it's a combination of not getting a higher education and then also being able to have the ability to spend more time, you know, bringing more people into the group.
So how would you say that transfers or relates to the group having a cult mind, having a control aspect over their members, to have them not so thoroughly educated, especially by outside influences?
I know that's their biggest danger is education, because the more educated you become, the more like your consciousness expands, your horizons expand, you learn things that you were denied learning before. And they would also say too, like so many people have left their organization as a result of going to college. So they began to see that, again, you need to, you know, restrict the amount of information that the group is given. And then if you're being sent off to college, that completely blows that theory. And then people begin to like question things more. So that's also part of it.
Right. So as you kind of pushed against that, was that about the same time then? I mean, you were finding the satanic symbols, or just kind of going down that road of exploration?
That was probably the satanic symbols and stuff. That was all coming up when I was probably in my early 30s. All that information was starting to come to light. So before then, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to be a good Jehovah's Witness boy, drop out of college. I still was able to start my own software business, and that's what I still do today. But it was one of those situations that it was just so much pressure for me not to go. It was just easier for me to just drop out.
Wow. So tell us a little bit more then, as far as you educated yourself, one of the things that I found to be fairly challenging is traversing that inner terrain of what you just said. I'm going to be a good Jehovah Witness. I'm going to be a good Mormon. I'm going to, and then the other side of it, kind of jumping back and going, yeah, but I have this desire to learn more. I just can't. You get the rebel in you. You know, how was that journey for you?
Yeah, so that part of the journey was definitely challenging. You know, it bothered me a lot, but you know, overall, you're looking at the big picture, because literally any day the world was going to end. So, and I'm going back like, you know, 20 years ago. Like literally, it's like, why are you doing this? Tomorrow could be Armageddon. Like, we don't know. And they would also always talk about the generation from 1914. And once that generation died, then Armageddon had to happen by then. And of course, I think that generation's long gone by now. But yeah, so Yeah, there was those types of pressures as well. Like literally any day the world was going to end.
Wow. Well, then that's going to definitely, create a fear that, I mean, nobody can
Fear.
actually prove differently. So,
That's how these groups work with fear. Actually, a lot of it I feel is fear. Yeah.
I would say absolutely. So I wanted to talk to you about cult mind mentality, and the reason, so you have this personal experience, and maybe a little bit more about the excommunication. Like you did lose everything. Like you lost your friends, you lost members of your family. What else do you feel like you lost? Did you feel like you lost like a financial? Um, were you impacted financially? How did that? Did you have to move from your community? What was that like?
I wasn't impacted financially. In fact, my finances got a lot better
Okay.
after I left. And one of the things that was interesting is that when I was going through this excommunication process, one of the things I was like a little argumentative with them because, I felt I needed to be, but I was like, you can't excommunicate me just for asking questions. Like, would Jesus or his apostles like gotten rid of someone because they asked Jesus a question he didn't want to answer? And their response to me was, we can, excuse me, we can if you ask the wrong questions. And you've been asking the wrong questions. And they did not want me to share what those wrong questions were with others.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I can see how that would be threatening. So when we come to the idea of a cult mentality, I know it's been proposed to me, and it's been said also, nobody really likes to think that they're part of a cult.
Right.
And I don't know if you ever related it to like, oh my gosh, I actually woke up, you wake up one morning and just like, I really did belong to a cult. That sentence is it's kind of a scary sentence to say. Um, did you ever say that to yourself, or do you just recognize it as something as such?
Yeah, even among Jehovah's Witnesses, we would actually sometimes refer to it as, or if someone said it was a cult, we would agree with them because there is a scripture in, I think, 1st or 2nd Corinthians, where I think the Apostle Paul talks about them being called a cult. So it was almost like a badge of honor that all of these false religions would call us a cult. So we'd be like, yeah, we're a cult and we are brainwashed. And when we would say that, we would mean like our brains were clean, like the religion actually washed our brains of all bad information. So it was a different, again, a spin of putting things in a certain way to like still make it positive for the group.
That's stunning. I mean, that's blowing my mind really, because I can see so easily. I can see how it would be like, yeah, and we're brainwashed. It's like really just putting the positive, we've had our brains washed clean.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So you and I I don't, that was a new one for me from you, just like that. I'm kind of sitting with that one. What? Yes, we are a cult. So for my experience on that one, I didn't really like that idea. I didn't like recognizing that. I'm like, yeah, I was just, there's a really like, it's its own society. It's its own entity. Mormonism has its own quirks. It's its own thing. And then what I did is I actually was listening to a book and reading a couple of other ones where cults are identified. Like they have a system, and how they control your behavior, how they control your information, how they control your thought processes, how they control your emotions. I'm reading through this and I'm like, oh dear, there's too many of these aspects that the Mormon Church actually does do. This qualifies. I'm going to say that, yeah, it is a cult. And I know that there's things that very much parallel the Jehovah Witnesses as well, with where you've come from, that yes, this parallels, this actually fits a cult definition. And so, I mean, they're religious institutions, they're systems, and they're very, very thorough systems. And they have their own defense mechanisms in place to make it so their members don't leave, their members don't recognize that, their members are happy to be called a cult and happy to be brainwashed, and that kind of thing, because they've created the verbiage differently.
Yes.
And speaking of the verbiage, which is along the information side, one of the things that does fall under the under the definitions of cult, and I want people to know that I'm actually referring to Stephen Hassan's um, cult experience, his book definitions, and it's the language of how you speak Mormon. Like if I was going to walk the walk and talk the talk, there are certain callings, there's just words, there's just references. And
Absolutely.
if you're not part of that, you really you're not part of the culture. Do you have something that's similar as in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many different things where you could talk about something and you would only really understand it if you were a Jehovah's Witness.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like all kinds of crazy things. But yeah, absolutely.
All right. So some of the things I would love to hear, let's kind of highlight a few of these things that do define cult. And the reason I want to do this is because, this podcast is it's for people that are leaving or are leaving a cult experience or have left or have been impacted by ritual abuse, cult abuse, that kind of thing. And being able to see how seductive, like it's seductive. It's all around us, and a lot based on these lists. I'm just going to say based on these lists. This is not my opinion. This is based on these lists that I see fitting. It's really clear that a lot of what we're working in and experiencing and facing with the whole last 2020 and what's still continuing through 2021 with the virus, the vaccines, the social shaming, the things that happen, how people interact with each other or are really afraid of each other or really defiant because of it. There's just so much polarity, and there's just a lot of like fireworks that can be going on, or sandpaper against each other, and confusion and things like that. I feel like this is the same thing. I feel like we are in some kind of over cult programming mentality, and we're functioning within a societal cult programming, focusing.
Absolutely.
So tell me some things that stood out to you. Let's begin there.
Yeah, well, from what you were saying, like you started to remind me of like the whole concept of like what's happening today. Like I feel that people are being programmed with fear, right? Over the last, we're currently in year 2 of the lockdown,
Right.
the pandemic, and it's all about fear. The mass media, et cetera, is like constantly scaring people. Why? To like control them. If you see someone without a mask, it's like, who is that person? How dare they not wear a mask? They're killing us all. Or if you dare to like hug your children in public or give them a kiss on the cheek. I can't believe that person just kissed someone on the cheek. Like, how could they do that? Shaking someone's hand is like, why would you do that? So this whole mentality that's affecting people now is the same mentality that affects a cult and cult members. It's a control type thing. So yeah, so with the Jehovah's Witness cult, so much was about fear, because if you did not obey their rules, you could be destroyed at Armageddon. So once you get into the group, that was all really good. But then now if you dare to leave, they would call it a dog returning to its vomit. Literally.
Oh, yeah.
I think Revelation or something, book of Revelation, it says something like that. So yeah, it was like you would become even the worst of the worst. Like if you knew better and then you made another decision, like that was like, there's pretty much no hope for that person. So having the fear control is one thing. And then you're constantly bombarded with, this is the truth. This is the truth. Everyone else is wrong, but we have the truth. Stay with us. Listen with us. We'll allow you to live. These other places won't. So yeah, those combinations would just, it puts people into a certain mentality it's really sad actually, because when someone is trapped in it, they don't even realize they're trapped in it.
Right.
Like it's the frog in the boiling water, and they keep turning up the heat, and you think it's okay, realizing they don't realize that you're being boiled alive, and it's not just causing harm to yourself, but harm to people that are around you as well. So
it is. It's extremely seductive because we are the heat's getting turned up, and it's very comparable to the thought control that is on this list, of this model where it's like you've got to decide between good and evil. So there's this black and white thinking,
Black and white.
there's also you're going to organize people into the us and them. And that's done so well by, you can get groomed into that. And then once you feel othered, or once you feel like you can other people, the us and them gets very, very easy to fall into. And the loaded language and the policing of each other, that's the one that I think I noticed the very fastest. And it is so prolific. It's groomed in the Mormon church, again, because of the structures, and it's couched as, I'm just really curious. I mean, I'm caring. I care about you. You're my neighbor.
Right.
You just had a baby. Do you need anything? Which is really nice, except that it creates these really porous boundaries. People don't know how to set up boundaries, and they don't know how to receive that boundary set. They get really offended. And so there is just this assumption that if you're doing something that I'm offended by, you don't have a mask, you have a mask, whatever it is, I have the right, and I'm going to just walk right into this, and I'm going to shame you on either side of this, of whatever it is that I'm feeling you should be doing. So I have all the right in the world to just unload on you and really just come apart on you, and just take all of that fear that has been collecting because of everything that I've been watching and other things that I've been seeing, and the confusion that I have, and this black and white thinking, then I get to unload this fear, and you get to be my target. Like, you can't think independently. Everybody's got to agree. This idea of good and evil, there's always something that is against you. There's always something that's watching, that kind of thing. And then just the phobias really just gets to be pretty monumental. And then I think you and I were also, some of the things that we were talking about, so just indoctrinating you early on, getting you to ring doorbells and say, look, I've got the truth. What I have to say is actually the truth here. That's something that's really part of this indoctrination, and where the information control comes from. So here again, we're talking about media, we're talking about things that are being censored, people that are being pulled off of this.
Yes, censorship is
massive.
Yeah, massive.
Speak to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just speaking to this current situation that's going on, you're only allowed to hear one side of the argument, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to, like, for example, what's going on now with the vaccine, and I don't know how much we can talk about this, but
censorship, whatever.
I know, exactly. So we're having this, and already we're like, oh, you have to be very careful about what we say, or else this information will be purged. I just was reading too that the other day that YouTube just removed 30,000 videos that they felt had misinformation about the vaccine. So rather than let adults make their own informed decision, they remove the information, so you only hear what a certain group says and have no access to what another group is saying. And that's exactly what happens in the cults too. Mm-hmm. You're not allowed to have access to other information. So, and whether that information gets destroyed somehow or whatever it is, so that, like, if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you come across something, let's say you get a book or something and it says something negative about them, that book's got to be destroyed. It's what do they call it? Demonized, or it's satanic, and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's all about fear. And then they could put the full control onto you, and then they block you from getting all the information you need to make a good decision. So even about this type of thing that they want to inject into you, I'll just say something. I'll try to say it as nicely as I can. Basically, it's an emergency use experimental drug that doesn't even stop the virus. You still have to wear a mask. You still can get sick, and you still can transmit it. So I'm thinking to myself, well, what good is that? Why would you want to take something like that doesn't? They're already telling you it's not going to work, and that you have to keep taking them multiple times. So yeah, it's all part of the whole game that religions play, like the mass media and the governments and big pharma. Like they're doing the same thing on a bigger scale, worldwide scale. Mm-hmm. I've seen people on donkeys in Mexico wearing a mask, like no one else around them, and I'm like, really? So
wow.
Yeah. It's
Wow. Well, I'm going to read right from this list when we're talking about information. I believe what you're talking about here, information control, compartmentalize information into outsider versus insider doctrines, ensure that information is not freely accessible, control information at different levels and missions within the group, allow only leadership to decide who needs to know what and when. I'm seeing a really big parallel here.
big parallel.
And this is specifically about cults. And the reason I want to bring this forward is not just to say, hey, look, what's going on outside, but for those that are listening, it's kind of, it's in this space where you may want to ask the question, what am I involved in? And how am I working with what is going on outside in the society political arena? And then how does that reflect in where I am right now? Am I uncomfortable? Do I feel shut down? Am I really feeling threatened? And I think the biggest question to ask is, where am I afraid? And look into that, because honestly, when you're encouraged to spy on each other or to report on each other, when you feel like you have the right to just kind of attack another person because of that, reporting deviant thoughts you talked about, and having a buddy system to monitor and control members, that happened, that I can relate to that. This is all to ensure that individual behavior is monitored by the group. So we've got this great big mind, this group think that has been refined within the religion and within the structure of religion. And we're representative of two different religions completely. But it's got all of these parallels, and yet we're kind of swimming around in the same soup.
It does. And what's interesting too is, so like for someone like me that went through the whole excommunication process,
Mm-hmm.
at the end they tell you, or I was told, like, if you decide you want to repent and come back to us, there's a situation where you can you could still come to the Kingdom Hall for different meetings, but you must sit in the back row. And you must arrive just as the meeting starts, and you must end immediately after it ends. You're not to talk to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And after about 5 years, we'll review your case, and you might be what they call reinstated again. So not only do they excommunicate you, now they want to break your back. They want to like force you into submission. So how many people would do that, where they're just sitting and they're going through this whole process because they want to get back in again, but it's just like it's a really, really bad situation. People don't even realize what they're doing. So
no, you're right. And it when you don't have, I've noticed this in the Mormon religion too, that when people get really frustrated and they stop going to church, they leave. It's kind of a leaving, meaning I can't engage anymore. I'm not going to go to my Sunday services. I don't want to participate during the week, that kind of thing. But I've noticed, and I noticed this for a number of years, there's a lot of people that once they have a child, they get married and have a baby, it's kind of like, oh, now I'm responsible. And I don't want to do this wrong. It's a really positively intentioned, I want to be a good person. And my only fallback and my biggest resource was this religion. And I'm going to step into it again. And sometimes they're welcomed, and other times they're looked at kind of, side look and that kind of thing. Everybody has their own, conversation or their own attitude about that, maybe experience with that. But what you're talking about is, again, an external, like what it's like to be an independent thinker and then be punished for that and have that not supported.
right, exactly.
Where we're going with, let's see, the permission. Here's another thing with your behavior control. Permission is required for major decisions. Rewards and punishments are used to modify behaviors. Would you say that there's a little bit of behavior modification
Oh my
going on?
goodness. Yeah, because if you if you spend a lot of time knocking on doors, there's different statuses you can get to. One is called an auxiliary pioneer and a pioneer, which means you put in 60 hours or 90 hours a month. You're praised, like, oh, brother or sister so-and-so is doing so much work, and let's interview them on the stage. And then people are like, or they have these big assemblies, and there could be like thousands of people in the audience, and it's like they're putting all this praise onto people that are like doing so much extra work for the group. Mm-hmm. So definitely it's very alluring that way. Not just that too, but you get an instant family. So if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, and then you become one, you start studying the Bible with them and all that, and you go to the Kingdom Hall for the first time. Everybody's all over you. They love you, giving big hugs. Who are you? Welcome. And it's like, oh my goodness, I've got a brand new family, and like everyone wants to be your friend. So that part of it's a learning too, because you know that when you leave, they're also going to leave. It's conditional strings attached love is really what it is.
That is a really good way to put that. Conditional strings attached love. That I can relate to also. I mean, there's something that's really alluring, as you said, and beautiful about the society and the social aspect of coming into, in this case, the Mormon Church, in your case, Jehovah Witnesses, because they are very willing to be there. They're very loyal. And the idea is to be very welcoming, and it's genuine. And you can sense that, it's just like people are really excited that you're there.
Yeah.
And as you go on with everything and you're realizing this just doesn't jive with me anymore, it's very clear that you don't know where you're headed. So it's not like you can just step into another congregation or another social structure or another family on whatever level. It's very lonely. It's very scary. It's very much you kind of stepping into your own boots and saying, at the end of the day, I mean, I gotta stand next to myself on my decisions. And that process it could take years. It could take decades, actually. I know in the Mormon Church, for some reason, it's really, it's difficult, very difficult to leave. In fact, I told a friend once, it's like, you don't do the Mormon Church, it does you. I mean, it's just so like it's just woven into your belief, who you are, how you show up in the world, when you're really engaged in that. And so you actually have to kind of deconstruct yourself to some degree on what that looks like and how you know yourself, and then how other people relate to you. And then to leave the church, you don't just say, I think I'm out, maybe I'll hang out, come back on Easter or something like that. I mean, I did, my experience was I walked the fringe for a few months. It was so confusing to the members. I was fine. I knew I was on my way out, but I still wanted to be there to support my children and the situation that I was in at the time. And so I would go, and there was a divorce that had happened, and we were still all in the same area, and people just didn't know. It's like, well, do we talk to her because like they're divorced now? Do we say hi to her? And I watched this actually happen, and it felt very much like just a social experiment in a way. I wasn't emotionally engaged, so I was able to look at it very neutrally, but more people opted to not speak to me because they didn't know what to say than to speak to me. And then it got to a point where those who did start to push in they were kind of like, you're unsafe. We don't know what to do with you. So we're just going to kind of push you out.
Right.
And, you can't walk that fringe. It's not a comfortable place for the members, because you're threatening everything. You're threatening the belief, you're threatening the system, you're threatening, everything with your independent thinking and I just want to, try this or sit here. I don't believe it, but I'm here. It's like, well, then what are you doing here? It's very, very weird. So exiting is not, in this case, the church, even if people really officially want to do it with the Mormon Church, you need a legal document, which, okay, that's, I don't know. I have an opinion about that. And my name is removed from the records of the church as far as being an official member. Somebody said it's just going from one database to another database. And I'm like, yeah, I know.
No, it has, I believe it has a spiritual meaning. You took a stand. So I know of people that are Jehovah's Witnesses, and they stop believing in things, but they don't want to go through what I went through. Mm-hmm. So they'll just move to another part of the country and not tell anyone where they moved to try to like start a new life, like almost like if they're in the program where the government's protecting them. But what I've been finding is that you really need to make a stand. And Jehovah's Witnesses have something called a Letter of Disassociation. So if you feel that you no longer want to be a Jehovah's Witness, you can write them a letter, very simple, that just says, for whatever reason, I have decided, I've taken a personal stand, and you can state the reasons why. I no longer want to be associated as a Jehovah's Witness. They'll take that letter and they'll make an announcement in the congregation that such and such is no longer a Jehovah's Witness. They've submitted their letter of disassociation. But to me, that's the way to go. It's because you're making a stand that you don't want to be associated with that group anymore. And the group is counting on you not making that decision. So they want you to stay enrolled and so forth. But I believe that there's spiritual contracts as well as physical contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So in the spiritual world, you're making a contract, like with Jehovah's Witnesses, you get baptized. Once you're baptized, I was baptized, I think when I was 17. So once you're baptized, you're officially in. And then to get out, really, you either have to go through the excommunication process like I did, or you have to write them a letter.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, like I tell people, just be brave, like have courage, because your life is actually going to change and change for the better. Because all of a sudden, slowly, all these new friends started appearing in my life, people that accepted me for who I was, and people that were interested in what I had to say and were independent thinkers as well. And it just, if I was still in it now, I would be a broken man. I would be a broken person. I just would have been completely broken by them. So I tell people, just be brave, have the courage. It's going to hurt at first, but it'll be the best decision you've ever made in your life.
That is really powerful. I really appreciate that. I share that sentiment. There's things that we can do for ourselves that are very clear. And when you're saying, take that stand, do this for yourself, it's going to be scary, it's going to hurt, you're going to have you're going to recognize some loss. But on the other side of this is some richness that it's a depth of richness that you really are unfamiliar with, even with the richness that you've experienced in the community that the cult community that you're in. Being able to step out of that in a very self-actualized, powerful way is so valuable, so valuable. So I would love to be able to have you share that. Like, this is really great. Do you have since you left, part of your win, part of the reward, part of the life that you've created for yourself since that time? Share with us just a little bit about that. Maybe make a couple of parallels if something comes to mind, and then tell us a little bit about how, if anybody wants to reach out to you, what are you doing now? How can we find you? How can we see what you're doing next? Because I know you're on YouTube, so there's some fun things there. So I'm going to just go ahead and let you follow through with that.
Okay. Yeah. So I would, the best way for me to liken it is, since I left, it opened up a flower garden of blooming possibilities. All of these things that just would never have been possible before, all of a sudden, like, wow, now became possible. And it was just so many new things. Like, now I was able to learn and take it. I wanted to learn about other religions. I wanted to understand, like, what's the spirituality of this? What about this? Like, all these things that, like, don't look into that, blah, blah, blah. So I really became immersed in that. I became immersed in just so many different intellectual things that I wasn't before. And then I started getting into quantum physics and the concept of a holographic universe, the concept of there's something called the double slit experiment, where the observer changes the observed. Schrodinger's cat experiment, is Schrodinger's cat alive or dead, etc. The unified field theory. And then all those things led me to for myself, it was a really big awakening for something called the Mandela Effect. And what I started doing, I just recently started doing this a couple years ago. I started making my own videos about what the Mandela Effect is and what consciousness is and what reality is. And we exist in a world that is far more complex and beautiful and amazing than what we've ever been taught. And I'm really getting a kick out of challenging people's thoughts and their belief systems by sharing things and making connections about things that they would have never made before. So I'm doing that as a relief. It's kind of like my hobby type thing, but it's growing, and that type of a thing. And so many people are fascinated by this whole Mandela Effect. And that's one of the things too, that the world doesn't, like science, doesn't want people to start looking into, because once you start looking into that, then you begin to realize things about reality and how reality can change and so forth. So I started a channel on YouTube. I call it Quantum Businessman. And it's currently one of those shadow banned channels. You would have to type in Quantum Businessman to actually find me. And I created a video for my business that had to do with the Mandela Effect, because my business deals with food distribution. And a lot of food products, there was like really strange things happening with the names of food and brands that I always remember that didn't exist, that never existed. Like one of the things I mentioned to people is Stouffer stovetop stuffing. A lot of people have heard of that product, but it's never existed. There's no such thing. It's always been Kraft stovetop stuffing since it was released in 1971. So, and all these other tie-ins, geography's changed, the world of art has changed, the Mona Lisa smiles, blah, blah, blah. If you watch my channel, you start to see what that's all about. But I tie it into quantum physics, and yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with that. Again, it's just challenging people's belief systems and expanding their consciousness.
That sounds like a really fun way to play, actually. I'm fascinated with quantum physics. Quantum physics came into my world a number of years ago, and it answered a lot of, like some of these questions that were flying around in my head. And one of the biggest ones it answered was, what prayer actually does. So what is couched as prayer and intention and that kind of thing. And how the quantum observation and all of that, anyway, we won't get into what that is, but I get what you're saying, and I'm drawn to that. And I only heard of the Mandela Effect actually by meeting you and what that was. And there's a part of me that really I do a pushback on this. It's like, no, it was Stouffer stovetop stuffing. It wasn't Kraft. Where did you pick that up at? And yet there's this thing that you described called the Mandela Effect, and you have a lot of other examples, on your channel that, I've watched them.
It's nonstop. And they're not stopping. That's the thing. And it's crazy stuff too. Like historical things like World War II. The Nazis sailed into New York Harbor in 1941 and blew up an oil tanker, and people like all this, like what? Like that never happened in my history books. So yeah,
right.
Stuff is like all over the place with these men. There's literally tens of thousands of them people have documented.
It really kind of starts playing with what you want your information to be, and so it really does add to what we're talking about here is like, what do you want your information to be? How anchored are you into what you want things to be, what your belief system is, what you can never say no to, what you can never, always say yes to, the never and always the black and white thinking, what can we expand into? And so admittedly, your channel has pushed some of my what buttons, I go, what?
Yeah.
And it's not been threatening, I think, because of where I am in my process. And I'm like, that's fascinating. And so I think what I'm going to, what I would do is encourage people to just get onto the Quantum Businessman and just listen with some curiosity and, kind of play with that. And then if it's something that can be transferred over to somewhere in your life, if you have this idea that you're just like, I don't like what I'm seeing on the outside. I can see that there's parallel things about, the cult mind that we're really all existing in and what's going on here. And then bring it back into making that strong stand, like you said, and really learning what personal sovereignty is would be really, really powerful. And I would highly encourage that. So as we're wrapping up here, I would love to have you share anything else that you want to share with those who are listening to the Letters of the People podcast, and we can kind of get ready to say goodbye.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing. I want to share a Mandela effect about the Bible, because, when you're a Jehovah's Witness, you read the Bible, it's about a 5-year thing. So they give you, 5 years, and you read like 3 or 4 chapters a day. And at the end of the 5 years, you're through it. And I've been through the Bible at least 4 times, besides other constant Bible study. But so you get to know the Bible really well, and there's scriptures that you remember. So when Mandela effects affect the Bible, that's like a big, people get really, really distraught. And I'll just tell you one of them. There's many, but one is in the book of Isaiah. There's a famous scripture that from my old timeline, it was always the lion will lie down with the lamb. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
And
I've read that. Yes.
yes, but now it's never been that. It's always been the wolf will reside with the lamb. And as a Jehovah's Witness, I remember like there was a mural in the back and behind the stage of a lamb and a lion with that scripture from Isaiah, the lion will lie down with the lamb. And it was like, lion will lie down with the lamb everywhere. And then when that Mandela effect hit, it's funny, I was talking to my dad about it. And my dad was like, he's like, Chris, you're just looking at one translation. That he's like, they all say lion with the lamb. You're just looking at one that says wolf. And I'm like, no, Dad. So he goes into his bedroom. He pulls out like 7 Bibles. He's got all of them. I think a Gideon one you get at the hotel, whatever.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And he's looking at every one, and it says wolf, 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 wolf. Like, what's going on? Like, it's never said that before, even the Jehovah's Witness Bible. So yeah, so those are the types of things, but it sends people on a weird, I was talking to somebody about that, and he said, Chris, when I saw it change to the wolf will lie down in the lamb, will reside with the lamb, he's like, I just cried and prayed for 2 days. I'm like, I didn't know what was going on. Like,
Wow.
I didn't understand this because I knew that scripture so well.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the Mandela effect can really at first shock you and be, like, how could this be? How could things in the Bible change before our eyes? But it's just another sign of what's going on in reality. And of course, my videos will explain that further, but I just wanted to throw that one in there because a lot of people have heard of that expression.
That one, yeah. When you and I spoke about that one, that was one of the ones that I've had a lot of resistance with, because I remember the lion and the lamb. I remember beautiful paintings. I think I even owned one where this lion and lamb idea, where I go with the wolf shall reside with the lamb kind of idea. I'm like, well, isn't that our state of being right now? I mean, a wolf in sheep's clothing, all of this stuff. And I'm looking at what's around and particular people that are in leadership positions that are wolf, not just wolf-like, but they're wolves. And they're residing with us. They are right here. And so there's a part where my mind starts jumping into further, like, what is this? What are we showing ourselves? Where did this Mandela effect come from that has to do with this particularly? And, that can be another discussion. Maybe there's more information. When you come up with it, send me an email and we'll just talk about it, because that one is just so cool. Anyway, I just really appreciate you spending some time with me today and just really sharing more about you, sharing the championing and the powerful life that you're living right now, and then your process of what that is and how you're seeing it reflecting in the world and all of this. So I appreciate you being here and would love to visit with you again sometime. And I'm going to encourage everybody to visit your website. If you have a website, or is it just a YouTube channel? What is it exactly?
I have both. I have my main company website, but unless you're into food distribution, you probably won't be interested in that. If you were, it's necs.com. But my other website is quantumbusinessman.com. And I've got all my videos up there too.
That's fabulous. All right. I appreciate your time. Good luck on the next YouTube release, and we will chat with you again. Thanks
awesome.
again. Okay.
Thanks, Asia.
Bye-bye.
Bye.